Hi, uh, welcome to this session, and our focus is on research paradigms, theoretical and conceptual frameworks. So, our objective is to explore the different research paradigms, look at the different aspects that underlie each paradigm, and we'll also look at, of course, why paradigms are important in research. And then we can move on and discuss how frameworks, particularly theoretical and conceptual frameworks, um, are important and what they are in research. So we begin with, of course, understanding what the research paradigm is. It is a set of beliefs or assumptions or practices that guide any research, whether the research is quantitative or qualitative. And of course, so this is basically how we view or look at nature or what is happening, or in simple terms, reality. Okay, reality is the nature of the world and what lies in the world. So um, how we view that is what we call a paradigm. And of course, different researchers have different assumptions and beliefs and how they conduct research. And that research is driven by those assumptions and beliefs. Of course, to some extent, you'll find, yeah, they have those biases that um, drive their research. Most often, you find, for instance, someone says, "No, I am a pure. I believe in pure quantitative." Other one says, "I believe in pure qualitative." But then, of course, with time, there are those who say, "No, it's rather better to do both mixed. To do mixed, which involves both qualitative and quantitative." But we are going to explore this in a moment. So there are three fundamental aspects or questions um, that underlie a paradigm, and these are interconnected and influence each other. Um, so we have ontology, which answers the question of what is reality. So you have there an example of does God exist? Yes or no? Or do are there other uh, Earth-like planets out there in the universe? Such kind of questions. Okay. So ontology answers such a question. It answers issues to do with the form and nature of reality. Then epistemology answers the question of how can reality be known. So there we'll be looking at possibilities of knowing reality. If, for instance, we have said that if, for instance, we ask a question of whether God exists or not. What then are the possibilities of knowing whether God exists or not? Okay. So epistemology has to do with the study of knowledge, knowing. And then we have methodology, which answers the questions of how can we discover the answers about reality. So there we'll be looking at processes or procedures of collecting data and analyzing it to then understand um, the reality that is defined. So in simple terms, we use methods to discover uh, uh, knowledge, and that is epistemology, and of course, of which knowledge is about reality or what exists. Okay. So we have different types of different categories of paradigms. We have positivists, positivists. You have critical researchers. You have constructivists. You have interpretivists, and you have transformative researchers and pragmatists. So let's take a look at these, and we factor in the other three aspects of a research paradigm. Yeah, so you will have a paradigm and ontology, epistemology, and methodology. So to begin with, so you have a you have positivism, which is the original paradigm with research, and under this, the, the, the assumption or the belief is that there is only a single reality, which is absolute truth, and this can be tested through experiments whereby reality is measured objectively and observe and think and the study is observed, and this is in most cases purely this is purely quantitative. So such kind of studying you can find it, for instance, in physics, theoretical physics, and so on. Um, uh, or find it in medical labs and what. So most of in most cases this is to do with sciences, pure sciences. Then you have post-positivism, which is more related to positivism, but in here the assumption is that uh, the truth is not absolute, but it could be probable, um, uh, and therefore we have some kind of modified experiments in the way we study reality, and in this case mostly again purely quantitative, but some in some cases could involve some qualitative, and in this case compared to positivism, which focuses on verifying theories, positivism focuses on theory falsification. And then we have critical, which assumes there are multiple realities and that these realities are socially and historically constructed, are socially constructed. And the start of such reality could be qualitative. You have constructivism, which also relates to both critical and interpretivism, and also there are multiple realities and therefore multiple meanings. Reality is socially and historically constructed, and this can be done qualitatively, but in most cases to generate theories. Okay, so this is how reality is studied. Um, uh, then you have interpretivism, which also has the idea that there are multiple realities, but in this case, the assumption is that reality is individually interpreted, and because individuals, even if they are within the same communities, same households, they have different lived experiences, and this can be studied qualitatively by, for instance, interviewing individuals through life stories and so on. You have transformative, which also looks at multiple realities, but is does it on a basis that there is diversity, and the idea is that the knowledge is the possibility of knowing such realities, or how events happen, or how phenomenon happen, is that we try to understand lived experiences of different groups, and because each of the different groups, let's say women, youth, disabled, old, and so on, marginalized, and such experiences are influenced by inequalities and injustices. And therefore, to be able to understand what is happening, we use mixed methods and in a collaborative way and empowering way so that we can then advocate for change. So in such a case where transformative is, you'll find some look at it as participatory or advocacy paradigm. Then lastly, we have pragmatism, which is based on assumption that reality is constantly debated. So has ideas of pluralism and that reality is problem or action oriented. And therefore, to understand that, we have to use most appropriate methods which appeal to particular contexts so that we can be able to understand what is happening in the real world. Okay, so this is a summary of the different paradigms. So we have here the interconnections of the components of research, under which you have a paradigm which also influences and influenced by research designs. We are going to look at research designs in the following session. And then the research designs, of course, influence methods, and of which those methods will now help us to understand how reality or how events happen or how certain phenomenon is happening. And within the middle of all this, we have research approaches. This is quantitative or qualitative or mixed method approaches. Okay. So why is research paradigm important? Of course, the research paradigms clarify the study paths and how reality would be studied. So if take an example of gender-based violence as as something you want to study. So in such a case, one may choose to use a transformative paradigm um, because in that case we have assumptions of inequalities, marginalization, and exploitation, and even issues to do with power. So in such a case, one may choose to use transformative. Or if, for instance, in one wants to study the idea of participation within communities or in certain projects, if you will. Yeah, so one can choose to use transformative if they want to create change or empower people, or another one can choose to use interpretivist or constructivist, depending on how on the objective they are studying, of the objective of their study. So um, uh, paradigms provide understanding of how researchers' assumptions, beliefs, and biases will affect research processes. So that is why, for instance, within in for instance, constructivist, interpretivist, and transformative, you'll find more researchers will mostly practice reflexivity, whereby before they undertake any research, they have to first understand themselves, understand their biases, and see how and review how those biases and beliefs will affect their studies, or how they will proceed with their studies. Then there is, of course, the idea that paradigm will also influence research theories and concepts. And in this case, we are particularly looking into or focusing on research frameworks, which we will now focus on. So the frameworks depict how reality is perceived and also guide how such reality will be studied. Uh, so if there is a certain behavior within a community, let's say prostitution, um, research framework would help us to would help in would help us establish how we want to perceive such a behavior prostitution, and the research framework would guide on how would we can study the idea of prostitution as per se. There are two categories of frameworks that guide research, and one is theoretical framework, and the other is conceptual framework. But before we get to those frameworks, we need to understand what theories and concepts are. So, theories are explanations of reality, explanations of what happens, how things happen. Okay, if, for instance, there is high crime rate in a certain area, so we have theories that would, for instance, explain um, that may explain how high crime rates are happening in a certain area. And of course, these are based on knowledge that has been developed over time. So that is why we are saying here that knowledge equals collection of theories and vice versa. So there are key aspects of theories. A theory is a system of constructs. These are concepts. We are going to look at this in a moment. It is characterized by propositions. Prepositions depict relationship between the concepts or the constructs, and of course usually formulated in form of hypothesis, showing how certain aspects influence the other. So in this case, in an example, you could say, for instance, a relationship between high income and poverty reduction, or high income within household and education achievement. Okay, so you could create hypotheses on both on those two, but does not necessarily mean that the other cause the other. But that is something that we can explore further when we come to designs, especially on idea of correlation and causation. Theories are also logical, of course, they are logically, systematically, and coherently presented. Because if the theory lacks logic, then it lacks connections between the constructs. Okay, then they explained with assumptions, and they are bounded by conditions. Because if we do not put conditions, then the theoretical assumptions become ambiguous, and therefore it becomes difficult to look for what to test or what to measure to achieve our goals. Concepts, on the other hand, are abstract. They're abstract ideas or things or phenomenon that are studied. It could be health, it could be education, it could be income or participation or corruption, or name them. All those aspects that you think could be studied. Leadership, human resource management, aspects such as motivation or retention, and so on. Um, so these are constructs that explain how a phenomenon happens or why it happens, and they are characterized by variables. So in this case, we have variables which are measurable aspects of concepts. For instance, if we are looking at if we are studying health or education, one could ask, could look at performance in health service delivery. Okay, so and then look at what, for instance, influences better health service delivery. Is it good facilities? Is it medical training? Is it attendance by or seeking behaviors of the health service seekers also? But of course, to identify this, for instance, to be able to know how variables interact or how they operate, we use indicators to measure those variables. So, for instance, if one is studying income, they could measure income levels annually or monthly or weekly or hourly. So it depends on how you want to study certain um, phenomenon by looking at by measuring certain variables. Okay. So we have theoretical framework which uses pre-established theory to guide current study. So for instance, one could use evolution theory in sciences, or one could use theory of planned behaviors to study behavior changes within communities. One could use agency theory to study issues of empowerment and and so on. So the theoretical framework rely on theoretical underpinnings based on existing research. I already earlier mentioned that knowledge equals a collection of theories. So therefore, there is knowledge out there that has been built over time, and that provides theoretical basis under which we can base our research studies. So the theoretical framework or defines relevant concepts because we already said that a theory is a combination of different concepts. And the theoretical framework for your study can be created before the study, which is deductive. Therefore, you derive it from literature, or it can be developed after the study, which is inductive, and therefore could be developed from the findings. And this sometimes is referred to as grounded theory. And so you can use a single or combination of theories in a single research. So it depends on the different concepts that you are studying or the different research questions. So different research questions could be looking at the different concepts within your study, and therefore you choose to have a combination, but relate a combination of related theories that can help you explain your study. On the other hand, the conceptual framework uses multiple concepts of multiple theories, I mean, from multiple theories to create a new framework for a current study. So you could be, for instance, looking at concepts of education, education or training as, for instance, as incentives or mechanisms within a certain program. That at the end, after education or training, people would be empowered, and when they are empowered, they can participate collectively or individually in certain activities, and that can, for instance, change in accountability within government systems, and that can influence service delivery. So you are looking at different concepts and how they are related. Now, if you go back to our theoretical framework, there are theories that, for instance, could explain such kind of relationships between these concepts. Okay, but of course, in one way or the other, in some studies, they you find they have described the concepts, but also provided the theory, or use certain theories to derive these concepts, or use concepts to get relevant theories theories that would help explain how if that would guide the study. Okay, so the concepts are drawn from theories or empirical studies and are created. The conceptual framework is usually normally created before the study. Um, so the different concepts, of course, the conceptual framework defines the different variables that you want to study, and the, the conceptual framework shows the relationship between those different the different concepts or different variables. And in most cases, you'll find the most most postgraduate studies are looking at dependent and dependent and intervening variables. Yeah, so when you get to writing your research proposal or dissertation, you may want to look into how to identify what your independent variables are or what your dependent variables are and the intervening variables. So if we can take use our example here, you could say that okay, so if we do training versus empowerment, then empowerment becomes a dependent variable and education becomes a dependent variable. If we look at empowerment versus participation, collective participation becomes dependent variable and empowerment becomes independent variable. If you look at change in accountability within government system, uh, versus participation of citizens, then citizen engagement or citizen participation becomes independent variable and change in accountability becomes independent variable. So it depends. So at the end of the day, social service increase in service delivery would depend on these other variables. So it depends on how you look at this. But of course, all these are not operating in a vacuum. They are operating within a context. For instance, where policies or policy frameworks are enacted or implemented to influence how society operates. And therefore, such policies, for instance, would become intervening variables, okay, within these relationships. So it is important to note that, or for instance, where if you are doing training within a certain village, that village has within that context there are cultural issues, and that culture becomes an intervening variable between education and empowerment, okay, or between empowerment and collective participation, okay. So it's very important that you note that. So why use research frameworks? Of course, they are foundation for the research study. They describe theories and concepts that are used in the study. Research frameworks can describe can provide structure for your study and lay a goal or vision for your study. But of course, they also show how your understanding of reality is and how that particular understanding of reality will influence your research approach and design. So, bottom line is that research paradigm informs the research theories and concepts used in the study, and the theories and concepts inform and influence the study methods and data collection methods that you would use. If you could remember our aspects of ontology, epistemology, and methodology, and the methods and analysis will influence how interpretations and findings are structured. Of course, again, based on the paradigm. So, while when you're planning to start your study or conduct your study, take time, reflect on your beliefs, on your assumptions, and on your biases related to regarding reality or regarding what you want to study, and read literature and choose a relevant framework that relates to your research topic, questions, and paradigm. These are some of the resources that you may use, and thank you.